Are you excited for our lesson today? The title of our lesson is Jacob Away from Home. Jacob arrived at a well outside the city. Some shepherds and their sheep were resting nearby. Jacob asked the shepherds, "Where are you from?" "Haran," they replied. "Do you know Laban?" Jacob asked. The men said they did. Then looking toward the city, one said, "See, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep." Jacob turned and saw a young woman coming toward him. Jacob introduced himself to Rachel as the son of her aunt Rebekah. Rachel was excited to meet him, and he hurried off to tell her father, Laban. Soon, Laban came and welcomed Jacob, inviting him to his home. Jacob became like part of Laban's family, along with Laban's sons and two daughters, Leah and Rachel. One day, Laban came to him with an offer. "Just because you are my relative, you shouldn't have to work for me without pay. Tell me what you would like to receive for your work." Jacob didn't have to think long. He was attracted to beautiful Rachel. "I will work for 7 years," Jacob said. "Then you must let me marry your daughter Rachel." Laban agreed. The 7 years went by quickly for Jacob. He loved Rachel and was glad to work hard so he could have her for his wife. Finally, the day came. "My 7 years are finished," Jacob told Laban. "Give Rachel to me now." Laban invited his friends to a great wedding feast. In the evening, he brought his daughter to Jacob. She wore the usual bridal clothes of her country with a heavy veil covering her head and her face, and she became Jacob's wife. In the morning, Jacob was shocked when he discovered he had not married the beautiful Rachel but her older sister Leah. Laban had tricked Jacob. "I worked 7 years for Rachel," Jacob angrily said to Laban. "Why have you tricked me?" "In our country, we never let the younger marry before the older," Laban replied. "You can marry Rachel too if you work for me for another 7 years. There was nothing Jacob could do, so he agreed. After a short time, Jacob married Rachel, but he continued to work for Laban to fulfill his promise. Having 2 wives was permitted by the laws of that land, but it was not God's way. As the years went by, Jacob's family grew. Jacob had also become a rich man. One day, God said to Jacob, "Return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you." Jacob told Rachel and Leah what God had said, and they agreed to return with him to his father's land. But as Jacob traveled back toward his home, there was something troubling him. Jacob was thinking about his brother Esau, who had been angry enough to kill him. Jacob had cheated his brother into giving him his birthright and then deceived his father into giving him the special blessing. Jacob had sinfully wanted his own way. Jacob sent messengers ahead of the caravan to tell Esau that he was coming. When the servants returned, they brought bad news. "Your brother Esau is coming to meet you with 400 men," they said. Jacob's face must have paled. "Esau is planning to take my life," he groaned. Jacob was terribly afraid for himself and his family. He divided his servants and family into 2 groups so it would be harder for Esau to attack them all. Then he did the best thing he could. He prayed. After he prayed, Jacob sent some of his animals as a gift to Esau. In the evening, Jacob sent the rest of his animals, his wives, children, and servants across a nearby river while he stayed behind. That night, something strange happened. Thinking he was alone, Jacob was startled to find a man there with him. The man began to wrestle with Jacob in the darkness. Jacob and the man wrestled all night. Finally, the man injured Jacob by putting his thigh out of joint. Jacob realized he was not wrestling with an ordinary man. He was wrestling with a heavenly visitor. "I will not let you go until you bless me," Jacob told the man. "What is your name?" the man asked. "Jacob," he replied. As Jacob spoke his own name, it must have reminded him of the kind of man he had been, a deceiver. "You will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel," the man said. The name Israel meant prince with God. God was giving Jacob a new name. He was changing Jacob into a new person. The next day, Jacob limped as he joined his family across the river. Seeing Esau and his 400 men approaching, Jacob arranged his family in the safest way possible. Then he went on ahead of them. Jacob's heart must have pounded as Esau approached. What would Esau say? What would he do? Jacob walked fearfully toward his brother, stopping even 7 times to humbly bow his face to the ground. When Esau saw Jacob, he ran to meet him. He hugged and kissed him, and both of the brothers wept. Jacob's family must have been relieved to see the brothers peacefully together. Jacob returned to the promised land, and after a brief time, God again told him to return to Bethel. Once again at Bethel, God spoke to Jacob, reminding him of his new name. He was now Israel. God again promised to make him the patriarch or father of many descendants who would live in the land. Jacob and his family left Bethel to return to where his father Isaac lived. Jacob's heart was particularly joyful because his dear wife Rachel was about to give birth to another baby. But joy turned to sorrow, for after giving birth to a baby boy, Rachel died. Jacob named the baby Benjamin. Sometime after he had buried Rachel, Jacob and his family arrived at Hebron. How pleased Isaac must have been to see the son he hadn't seen for such a long time. Isaac enjoyed his son and his grandchildren for 13 years. Then at 108 years old, Isaac died. Now Jacob, who had received the birthright and the blessing, would be the patriarch of the family. He was a far better man than he had been when he left home. God had been patiently at work, changing Jacob to be more like him.